will challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. It is now 9:12 p.m. in a cold, dingy, dark, wet, grey, dismal, lightless, sunless Budapest, where it is naturally raining as befits the season. And so, as all of this you might have expected. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody who has joined me. I really appreciate it. And this is some news that the so I see someone says, I wonder if George has any opinion about the Ukraine expert historian Timothy Snyder. He seems pure evil, but usually George is good at putting together a case with some details. I mean, yes, he is a very evil person who has indeed um, made a reputation for himself as a historian at Yale University. And it's a curious thing that he's embraced the entirety of the kind of liberal ethos of the United States. He hates Trump, he hates Putin, and of course he hates Viktor Orban. And so that's the malevolent threesome that he loathes. And the strange thing is that he obviously is quite knowledgeable about the subject. However, nothing that he says ever suggests any great knowledge. I mean, it's just pure propaganda. It's an ideological attitude, and no matter what uh, Trump does, he still berates Trump for not doing what needs to be done about Putin. He's not doing what needs to be done about Ukraine. So it's just this. It's this constant mouthing of these slogans that somehow Trump is beholden to Putin. He's not he's just doing Putin's bidding, and and so all of that is completely uninteresting and has nothing to do with any reality. I mean, he is just pitching it to an audience. I mean, there's an audience, the MSNBC audience, that wants to be told that somehow Trump is beholden to Putin and Trump isn't doing enough to support Ukraine. Um, Trump is an authoritarian. Trump is a fascist. Trump wants to emulate Putin, and Trump is anti-Ukraine. And I that's he just mouths these slogans over and over again. So I don't know. It was worth spending too much time on Snyder. Um, so the interesting thing is that the other day Russia unveiled a new missile system. Now, um, as I think people know, I'm somewhat of a skeptic about new missile systems, and I'm very skeptical about nuclear weapons. I mean, first of all, I'm skeptical of new missile systems because Russia already has all the missiles that it needs in order to win this war against Ukraine. It doesn't need any additional supersonic missiles. I mean, it already has a proper inventory of missiles to win this war. And as for nuclear weapons, I think they're completely useless. They have no real utility beyond deterring attacks by other powers, by other whether nuclear powers or non-nuclear powers. They just simply they deter attacks, but they have no efficacy in winning wars, and they have no real efficacy in threatening other nuclear powers. They don't even have much efficacy in threatening non-nuclear powers because states, most nuclear armed states, don't uh, will basically would not use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear state. I mean, it's only ever been done once by the United States, and nobody has tried it ever since. And so it basically is just deemed unacceptable to use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear state. And it's useless to use a nuclear weapons against a nuclear state because, of course, a nuclear armed state can retaliate. So if you use nuclear weapons, you're essentially committing national suicide. So therefore, as I say, it doesn't really have much efficacy. But people do get terribly excited by this, and so Russia unveiled this new system on Sunday, and so let's look at the write up of this meeting during which Putin and Gerasimov discussed this really exciting new Russian missile system. And here's the Russian write up. Yeah, so this is the visit to the command post of the Joint Group of Forces. Supreme Commander in Chief visited one of the command posts of the Joint Group of Forces, where he held a meeting with Chief of General Staff Gerasimov and the commanders. And after a kind of a survey of how things were going with the special military operation in Ukraine, they got onto this missile system, which is called the Burevestnik. Burevestnik. We had the Oreshnik, and now we have the Burevestnik. And here we have now, regarding the exercise that was conducted, I'd like to ask the Chief of the General Staff to report on one more event, which I briefly mentioned in my opening remarks: the testing of the Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile of unlimited range. I know I have a report from the industry, and I'm also familiar with the Ministry of Defense's assessments. And moreover, I remember vividly when we announced that we were developing such a weapon, even highly qualified specialists told me that, yes, it was a good and worthy goal, but unrealizable in the near future. This was the opinion of the specialists. I repeat, highly qualified. And now the decisive tests have been completed. So Putin here is referring to his address to the Federal Assembly in 2018, when he announced all sorts of new weapon systems, and that was really the heyday of Russian power, because there was a lot of excitement in the West, and there was also excitement in Russia that wow, we're back, in the glory days of the Soviet Union. We're bringing out new weapon systems, and we're ahead. We're now, in fact, Putin said during this address in 2018 that this is for the first time ever, Russians are ahead of the United States. We've always been trying to catch up with the United States, but now we're actually ahead of them. But so far, these tests haven't been particularly successful. But now Putin says this has proved to be a success. And so Gerasimov says, such a test was conducted on October 21st. Indeed, its difference from previous tests is that the missile flew for many hours, covering a distance of 14,000 kilometers. And that's not the limit. And Putin asks, at a nuclear facility, on a nuclear power plant, yes. The technical characteristics of the Burevestnik generally allow it to be used with guaranteed accuracy against highly protected targets at any distance. And in addition, during the missile's flight, all the required vertical and horizontal maneuvers were completed, thereby demonstrating its high capabilities for bypassing anti-missile and air defense systems. And Putin asks, and how long was it in the air? Gerasimov says, around 15 hours. And this is not the limit. And Gerasimov says, not the limit. we need to determine, Valery Vasilyevich, what it is, what class of weapons this new system belongs to. We need to determine the possible uses and begin preparing the infrastructure for deploying this weapon in our armed forces. I think Erasmus says yes. So naturally, there's a lot of excitement about this weapon system. Um, you know, it's very hard at this stage to determine whether it is indeed what it's cracked up to be, because what it's cracked up to be is obviously it's nuclear powered. Okay, it's capable of carrying nuclear warheads. Fine, and allegedly it's very it flies very close to the Earth's surface, so it can avoid um, air defense systems. Well, I don't know, but we'll have to see whether that's the case. But the problem, of course, is that it doesn't address the immediate problem, which is to bring this war in Ukraine to an end. So Trump was asked about this test when he was flying to Asia. And where are we? Up here we are. So here's his response.
This week, that they tested a new missile that can go more than 8,000 miles. Is that saber rattling for you? What is that?
They know we have a nuclear submarine, the greatest in the world, right off their shore. So I mean, it doesn't have to go 8,000 miles. And they're not playing games with us. We're not playing games with them either. We test missiles all the time, but we do have a submarine, a nuclear submarine. We don't need to go 8,000 miles. And I don't think it's an appropriate thing for Putin to be saying it, by the way. He ought to get the war ended. The war that should have taken 1 week is now in its soon 4th year. That's what he ought to do instead of testing missiles.
Mr. President, Mr. President, should EU use frozen Russian assets to help pay for defense of Ukraine?
I don't know. You have to ask EU. I'm not involved in that. That's up to EU.
Are you considering additional sanctions against Russia?
You'll find out.
All right. So that's Trump's response. Now, a couple of things about that. First of all, it's always amusing when Trump starts talking about something is inappropriate. I mean, this is the master of inappropriateness. And to be fair, it isn't inappropriate, since NATO continues to act belligerently. NATO continues to threaten Russia. NATO continues to talk up the prospect of a war with Russia. They keep saying that there's going to be a war with Russia by 2030. NATO threatens. They keep talking about the Tomahawk missiles, and therefore, all of given NATO's belligerence, I think it's perfectly reasonable for Russia to respond and show, well, okay, if you're really ready for a war, we've got plenty of weaponry in our armory. That's leave aside its effectiveness, leave aside whether the tests have indeed proven to be as successful as Gerasimov claims, and leave aside whether it really is such a effective weapon system. It's perfectly appropriate for Russia to respond to NATO belligerence by touting new weapon systems and making clear that they will indeed use weapon systems if necessary. So that's one thing. Now, the other thing, of course, is, and Trump says this, and he thinks he's being very insulting to Russia by saying, "Well, this is a war that should have taken over a week, and now it's almost 4 years," and so on. However, that's an argument that can be used just as easily against the United States. After all, you could say, "Hey, United States should have taken care of Iraq pretty quickly. Um, Took them years and years, and with let's say mixed success. Afghanistan should have taken care of that pretty easily. Took 20 years, and that didn't accomplish anything very much. And of course, it applies earlier on to Vietnam. Hey, you should be able to take care of a third world country. Remember, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Iraq. Those were countries that are in a very different socioeconomic category from the United States. They were basically what used to be called third world countries, colonial outposts, and United States had difficulties finishing them off. So Ukraine, after all, was comparable to Russia, at least in terms of technology and economy. It's not comparable in terms of size, not comparable in terms of nuclear weapons. But as I said, nuclear weapons are quite ineffective. Russia was never going to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine, so it was never going to be an easy win. Once the war became a war, and rather than what should have happened, which was a swift coup d'etat and the imposition of a pro-Russian regime in Kiev. Well, that didn't turn out right. But so once it became a war, then it was always going to be heavy going. So that was Trump's response, and the media are naturally very skeptical, as of course they would be about anything that involves Russia. And so here is the this is the NBC story. Trump calls Russia's missile test inappropriate, but is Putin's nuclear-powered weapon actually a threat? And then the main reason that no one else has tried to build something like this is that it doesn't really have any use. One expert told NBC News, which is always very nice, but how come they never make that claim about American weapon systems? And here we have Russia says it has successfully tested an experimental weapon that sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, a nuclear-powered cruise missile with unlimited range, whose low-flying, terrain-hugging, and loitering capabilities could evade American missile defenses and drop atomic bombs anywhere on Earth. Russian President Vladimir Putin said Sunday that the Burevestnik, meaning storm petrel, a type of seabird, was indeed a unique weapon that no other country possesses. This was the first time the missile had conducted a many-hour flight, Gerasimov said, but the Burevestnik is far from new, having been announced by Putin in March 2018. It uses a reactor, essentially a miniature nuclear power plant, to heat air to temperatures of almost 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which powers a ramjet engine that could keep it flying for days, according to this 2019 report. And so that's that. Now, as I say, I don't see much that's effective here beyond sending a warning signal, because it is clear that NATO is kind of for some loony reasons of its own, seems to want this war with Russia, and so we have all these countries, Estonia was today making statements that they intended to shoot out of the air any Russian flying objects, any whether planes, drones, whatever, anything Russian that crossed into Estonian airspace, they would shoot it down. Now, there's always a problem with that line of thinking because the assumption that Estonia or Poland, we talked about Poland was also been making these threats. I was going to shoot this or that down from Russia the moment it crosses Polish airspace. The problem is that these countries always assume that somehow Article 5 will come to their rescue. So they assume, okay, well, we shoot down a Russian flying object, and then, of course, we're safe from any possible Russian retaliation because we will then cry, Article 5, Article 5, we're under attack from Russia. And then, of course, NATO is supposed to rush in to assist them. I mean, that's the theory. The problem is that the theory really it doesn't work. I've said this so many times it hardly needs repeating yet again, but I'm just doing it just to make a record, which is that Article 5 does not say everyone goes to war on behalf of a NATO member state that is under attack. Article 5 says that an attack on one is an attack on all, which means every single member state will make its own decision as to what it will do in response to this attack. So that's it. So it's up to everyone else to make the mistake. However, the Article 1 of the North Atlantic Treaty, declares that NATO member states do not pick fights with non-NATO member states. In other words, it supposedly makes clear that the North Atlantic Treaty is a defensive treaty. Therefore, no NATO member states can start picking fights with non-NATO member states. In this case, if Estonia launches any kind of an attack on Russian aircraft, then clearly it would be in violation of the North Atlantic Treaty, because Estonia was making clear that it would do it in any circumstances in which you violate Estonian airspace. Well, any violation of Estonian airspace does not mean that it's under attack. So if you shoot down a Russian aircraft and you haven't established that this Russian aircraft was attacking Estonia, then you basically launched a war with Russia. And no NATO member state is under any obligation to come to your assistance. Remember, Erdogan tried that little stunt in 2015. Remember, this was at the time of the Russian intervention in Syria. And I think a Russian aircraft, maybe not, intruded into Turkish airspace. We don't know whether it really did. Obviously, it wasn't intentional, because why would Russia want to intrude into Turkish airspace? However, Erdogan just shot down the Russian aircraft, and a Russian pilot was killed. Now, Erdogan then went to NATO and essentially, hey, to invoke Article 5, in anticipation of a possible Russian reaction to what he had done. And NATO just said, well, I don't know. I mean, this may not be the right time to pick a fight with Russia. And so Erdogan suddenly found himself completely on his own, facing Russia completely on his own. And and once he realized that he was on his own, he had to eat humble pie and to apologize to Russia and you know, pay all kinds of compensation that Russia demanded, and but hey, that NATO commitment really didn't come through. So a number of these countries, Estonia and Poland as well, also thinking, oh, we're safe because we've got NATO in our corner. I think you're going to find that you're not really safe. If you actually pick a fight with a non-NATO member state, which of course Russia is, then you can't expect other NATO member states to go to war on your behalf. And I said this the other day, apropos of the revolting Radek Sikorsky, who was saying, "Oh, we're going to take, if Putin's plane crosses into Polish airspace, we're going to take down this plane, we're going to arrest Putin, and we're going to send him off to the Hague." Yeah, right. You try doing that. That's a warlike act. Russia will immediately attack Poland, and good luck trying to get NATO to come in and help you out. So Richard Phillips says if NATO was able to be triggered into war by countries provoking war, then there would be utter chaos. There would indeed be utter chaos, but it's also by happy, uh, chance that there is really that North Atlantic Treaty. That so if you're not in a mood to come to Poland or Estonia's assistance, then you say, well, look, I mean, I'm looking at Article 1. Article 1 is more important than Article 5. Article 1 makes clear no NATO member state can get into a conflict with a non-NATO member state. They just simply cannot do it. So therefore, then no one's under any obligation to come to Poland or Estonia's defense. So these countries are run by complete lunatics. I mean, they're just absolute idiots. Then, as Steve K9 says, back in the 90s, there were those who said, if we let these ridiculous Baltic states into NATO, we might end up in a nuclear war. Obviously, our masters did not listen, but you were right, no one is going to war for Estonia. Well, that's exactly it. You let into NATO these absolutely demented countries. They're just filled with this hatred for Russia. They're longing to get in to pick up a fight with Russia, to trigger a war with Russia, which they know they're not going to be able to fight this. They know that they're not in any. I mean, the size of these countries, they're about the size of a small middling town in the United States. That's the by population, they're just like a middling town in the United States. So therefore, they assume that somehow this membership, this club, this NATO club, gives them a carte blanche to start this war with Russia, because they think, well, once we're in, we can do what we like because the United States is going to come in and fight for us, and because it's not going to happen, and it cannot happen. I mean, it's obvious that you are trying to pick a fight. And really, it's even clear, and it's been the one consistent policy from Biden through Trump is a reluctance on the part of the United States. I'm not talking about the Europeans, but the United States, to escalate this war in Ukraine to a direct conflict between the United States and Russia. Neither Biden nor Trump really wants to go there and start a shooting war with Russia, between Russia and the United States. That doesn't mean that it won't happen. It could well happen. Things could easily get out of control. That's why I think it's so dangerous to keep this war going. It could happen, but so far, neither Biden, and Trump have taken steps to avoid getting into a direct shooting war. What they've done, what they chose to do, is force Russia to fight on NATO's terms. In other words, it's Russia that, they're fighting this war of attrition, but the war of attrition doesn't work to Russia's in Russia's favor because yes, Ukraine is gradually being destroyed through this war of attrition, but Russia is also suffering greatly through this war of attrition. So this is a war that Russia is fighting on United States' terms, which is that Russia is suffering casualties. Russia is suffering great losses on its infrastructure, its energy industry, um, but Russia is not making NATO pay for what it's doing. Russia has refused to be provoked into carrying out attacks on territory outside of Ukraine. So that's absolutely, this war is being conducted inside Ukraine. Now, this obviously doesn't work to Ukraine's advantage. On the contrary, it's rather painful for Ukraine. But every time NATO escalates, Russia responds by pummeling Ukraine all the harder. But Russia doesn't respond by hitting Poland or Germany or even the Baltic states. It hasn't done it. So it's Ukraine that continues to suffer as a result of NATO's escalation. But the point is, Russia is still fighting a war on NATO's terms. This is exactly the kind of war NATO wants. NATO doesn't suffer. No NATO soldiers are getting killed. NATO industry, humming along, producing weaponry, so there's money to be had. But it's Russians who are getting killed, and of course Ukrainians are getting killed. It's Ukraine that's getting slowly decimated, but NATO is not getting decimated. So that both Trump and the Trump administration and the Biden administration thought this is a very neat war. Good for us, not so good for Russia. So now, on another topic, now Viktor Orban, who the Hungarian prime minister, has kind of been caught in an unfortunate position. Now, as you know, I mean, Orban has been a major champion of Donald Trump. In fact, he was Trump before Trump. I mean, he really blazed the trail in 2015 for Trump when he seized on the immigration issue when Angela Merkel had opened the floodgates to migrants from into Europe, and Orban seized that on that issue and really became the kind of the leader of the anti-immigrant movement in Europe. And then Trump adopted Orban's view. So during all these years, Orban has been absolutely steadfast in his support for Trump. And then, of course, Orban's moment came apparently, it's now 2 weeks ago, when during that phone conversation between Trump and Putin, and then it seemed that both Trump and Putin had agreed to hold a peace summit in Budapest, with Orban there, in the middle. There'll be all the world attention would be there on him. He would be standing in the center of these leaders. He would be absolutely whispering in both leaders' ears, hey, this is a historic moment. You've got to sign the deal, do the deal. There won't be a great moment like this. And that would have been his great accomplishment. He would go down in the history books as a historic peacemaker. Now, as we know, those plans fell through, and Orban, oddly enough, continues to insist that a meeting will take place. Not necessarily in the next couple of weeks, but there will be a meeting in Budapest between Trump and Putin. He continues to insist on this. And the Russians are also sort of suggesting, there's still going to be a meeting with the Americans. But now a kind of problem has emerged for Orban, and that's arisen as a result of Trump's sanctions against the two Russian oil giants, and and therefore this, since Orban continues to import. I mean, most of the oil that Hungary uses comes from Russia, through the Druzhba pipeline. And of course, Orban has been berated repeatedly over the years. You've got to stop importing oil from Russia. You've got to stop importing. You've got to stand in solidarity with the rest of the EU and NATO. You can't go on importing your oil from the Russians. You got to stand with us against Ukraine. Now Orban, his response has been basically, "What the hell has Ukraine done for us?" It goes around persecuting ethnic Hungarians, so it's not exactly a great friend of ours. And in any case, it's bloody stupid to have a wage a war against Russia. It never works out well for anyone having a war with Russia. The two world wars were basically kind of the West versus Russia. Didn't work out very well in World War One. Didn't work out very well in World War Two. And above all, we Hungarians get absolutely clobbered over the head because we're right in the middle, and so we really get trampled on in a war with Russia. And he has been consistent in this. And then on the question of the oil imports, he says, well, this is the cheapest that we can get our oil for. I mean, all the other opportunities to get oil are going to be much more expensive. I mean, energy prices already in Hungary are not exactly cheap, as I know. The gas prices here in the winter are just murderous. And so, if Hungary were to cut itself off from oil imports from Russia, and to get its oil from Croatia, that which is what they're saying. Croatia would get, which has an outlet to the sea, so it would be the oil would arrive in Croatia by sea, and then it would be shipped to Hungary. All of that would be very cumbersome, very, very expensive, and the Hungarians insist the pipeline from Croatia to Hungary simply doesn't have the capability to carry the requisite amount of oil. Now, the sanctions that Trump has imposed. So, was it Ahmadovich is how much you're average paying for gas? Well, the thing is that what happens is that in the winter, it varies a great deal. But what happens is in the winter, it's not just that you use more gas because obviously you need that much more gas to warm your home, but you get punished for using more gas. So you pay extra for using more gas than usual, and then on top of that, you pay a fine for using more than you were using average. So when it comes, so the final sum for December and January are just absolutely just insane. I mean, I can't remember the exact sums, but I tell you, it's when I look at that bill every year, I just suffer palpitations. I think, well, there has to be some kind of a mistake here. But no. Anyway, so now, we've had Orban, who he gets regularly attacked, by the mainstream media, dictator, authoritarian, extreme nationalist, anti-Semitic, anti-gay, pro-Putin. extreme national, all of it, and of course corruption. Corruption. There's more corruption in Hungary than anywhere else. I don't know how anyone knows. They would say, "Oh, it's a byword for corruption," as if there's no corruption in any other part of Europe. Anyway, but there's always corruption. So now we have a new theme, and that is that Hungary. What makes Hungary particularly villainous, particularly monstrous and evil, is that it continues to import oil from Russia. He's been told many, many times to stop importing oil from Russia. If you recall, I did a podcast the other day about Radek Sikorsky, who sent out this cretinous tweet to Hungarian Foreign Minister Szijjártó, saying, "You've been told many times to stop importing oil from Russia. Please do so. Listen to President Trump and do so." Just ordering Hungary around. So now that's so now this is the new source of grievance, kind of universal grievance against Hungary, that Hungary continues to import oil from Russia. And you remember Ukraine was attacking the Druzhba pipelines just a few weeks ago, deliberately targeting the pipeline only in order to hurt Hungary. So it was not because they thought that in some ways this was going to affect the military situation for Russia. It was done in order to hurt Hungary. And one more reason as to why Orban says, "Well, what do we owe Ukraine? Why should we do anything for Ukraine?" But anyway, what's kind of interesting now is that the Trump administration, having imposed these sanctions on the two Russian oil giants, are basically now targeting Hungary. They have turned on Orban. And so here was this revolting creature, Matt Whitaker, who for some reason is the U.S. ambassador to NATO. I mean, it's for some reason because he was a kind of a Justice Department person. He was the, I think, acting Attorney General during Trump's first term, but now he's in NATO. And he was speaking on Fox News the other day on this very subject. So let's take a look at what Matt Whitaker said. So, and here we are.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is remaining defiant after President Trump hit Russia's two biggest oil companies with sanctions to pressure the Kremlin to end the war in Ukraine. Joining me now is the U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for joining us. I want to jump right in because we're a little short on time, but your reaction first to the Hungarian foreign minister from the last block. He indicated that the White House is giving Hungary a pass on Russian oil. It's not exactly the picture we've gotten from the White House. Is the U.S. respecting geography when it comes to Hungary, as the minister put it?
So here's her first question. This is the really important question. She's talking to the U.S. ambassador to NATO. Is, well, what about Hungary? What are we going to do about Hungary? This is so unacceptable. And here we go.
No, I mean, what's really happening is our expectation is that countries like Hungary, Turkey, and Slovakia that continue to buy Russian oil and gas will come up with a plan and execute a plan that weans them off of Russian oil and gas. And, Hungary, unlike many of their neighbors, has not made any plans or made any active steps. And so we're going to continue to work with them, and we're going to continue to work with their neighbors like Croatia and other countries that can help them wean themselves off. And obviously that pipeline is most likely to be shut off in the coming years as well. And so there's a lot of planning that our friends in Hungary should do, and we're going to help them, obviously, as a good ally, make those plans and execute them to get them off of Russian oil and gas.
I have to say, I do find it very difficult to take when they keep using this word weaning. Now, of course, we know what weaning means. It's what you do to babies, to get them off mother's milk. I mean, they keep using this term weaning apropos of oil from Russia. It's just always just so grating. I feel like you use a more appropriate word than weaning. But notice say the condescension. Well, we're going to basically tell the Hungarians how they're going to be using their energy, where they're going to get their energy from. It's itself is sort of interesting. Remember, Hungary was a member of the Soviet bloc, just not that long ago. And here they are. They're in this. We're in NATO and the EU, and they are being treated in a way far more contemptuously than they were ever treated during the Soviet era. So here was, oh well, we're gonna basically we're gonna have get we're gonna help them. We're gonna be helping them to get off Russian oil.
Russia argues that they're not going to feel these sanctions very much. Listen to this here.
Obviously, President Putin said that no pressure works on Russia, and frankly, we do not believe that these sanctions will have significant impact.
This is Dmitriev. This is this hedge fund guy who's kind of close to the Russian leadership. He took part in these various negotiations. He took part in the negotiations in Riyadh. You recall when Lavrov met Rubio, and Dmitriev was part of the Russian team. I mean, I think the idea is that he will be able to get on the wavelength, the Trump wavelength of talking about business interests. He was educated at Harvard and Stanford. So he kind of understands the language of American business. But he, without question, he represents the business interests in Russia, and who want to go back to the days of happy business cooperation. Steve K9 talks about be proud, George. Hungary did produce John von Neumann, Leo Szilard, Edward Teller, and Eugene Wigner and Dennis Garbo. So what Steve K9 is mentioning there is, of course, the people at the on the Manhattan Project. All of them were all Hungarians, and they're all on the Manhattan Project, and they all. When they were there as part of this team, they of course spoke Hungarian among themselves, so in later years they kind of distanced themselves from the Manhattan Project and say, well, they had moral qualms about it, and they weren't really happy and everything else. I don't believe it for one moment, but they did what they needed to do to show that they were never really happy with the idea of an atomic bomb. Anyway, I just wanted to do a little more of this just to show you the extent to which the Trump administration now has entirely adopted the verbiage of NATO, the verbiage of Keir Starmer, the verbiage of Mark Rutte and Stoltenberg and the rest. Gone completely now is America First. Gone is the, hey, we're not getting involved in other people's wars. Gone is the, hey, we should improve relations with Russia. Just listen to the language he uses.
On the Russian economy, because oil prices in the world will rise and Russia will sell just fewer gallons of oil but at higher price.
And yet, that's Putin's top economic envoy doing effectively a press tour in the U.S. to downplay the impact of these sanctions. He's also warning against so-called escalation if Ukraine were to get tomahawks. He leaked plans to meet with Witkoff in Miami yesterday, long before anyone from the U.S. side ever said such a meeting was happening. He claimed that a diplomatic solution is near and that Presidents Trump and Putin will meet in the future sometime soon, even though President Trump said just a few hours ago that he's not going to be wasting his time. If you look at all that together, it sure looks like pressure from President Trump does have Russia on the ropes here.
It does. And, President Trump holds all the cards. The Russians should end this senseless war as soon as they possibly can. It's not going to get better for them. And President Trump's going to continue to play these cards like these significant oil sanctions. And, the French interdicted Shadow Fleet boat that was carrying oil. And that, the Russians complained about. They complained about when they were called a paper tiger by President Trump. At every single turn, the Russians are not showing from a position of strength. They're actually very weak right now. And, they should end this war, end the killing. They're not gaining any territory for the thousands of troops that they're losing every single week on the battlefields of Ukraine.
All right, so that's the very unimpressive Matt Whitaker. And against what happened to your good friend Viktor Orban. Now, Orban will be traveling to Washington, I think, sometime this week, hoping that he can persuade Trump to give him a carve out, give Hungary a carve out on the issue of the sanctions. So here is a story in where are we? There's a story here in Bloomberg, and it says U.S. boosts pressure on Hungary to stop Russian oil imports. A senior U.S. diplomat rejected Hungary's arguments that the country's landlocked status left it no choice but to rely on Russian oil, as Washington raises pressure on Budapest to find alternative suppliers. There's a lot of planning that our friends in Hungary should do. Should. Notice this language, the should. And we're going to help them, obviously, as a good ally to make those plans. We're going to make plans for you and execute them to get them off of Russian oil and gas. This is Whitaker. And says, unlike many of its European Union allies, which have worked to cut reliance on Russian energy following Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Hungary has since done the opposite. Budapest now depends almost entirely on Moscow for its oil and the bulk of its gas imports. Now, this is obviously always held to be somehow, how utterly reprehensible it is on Hungary's part. But why shouldn't Hungary be as dependent as it wishes to be on Russian oil? Hungary has no beef with Russia. Hungary, maintains quite, cordial relations with Russia. Hungary has consistently said that this war should never have happened. And their position is that Ukraine should have appreciated the situation it was in and not listened to the blowhards of NATO and force this confrontation with Russia. So why should Hungary sacrifice anything for Ukraine? And that reliance may now be an energy security risk after the U.S. Last week sanctioned Russia's biggest oil producers, energy security risk. And then Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has warm ties to both Putin and to Trump, told state radio on Friday that his administration is seeking to defend the nation against oil sanctions. The premier also said he's consulting with executives of MOL. This is the oil refinery company in Hungary, um, the Hungarian energy company that imports oil thanks to a temporary EU exemption. And then we have Siarto, who says, well, basically, US sanctions pose no immediate threat to Hungary's energy supply. And so here he's saying, now it's kind of interesting here because Hungary, of course, is maintaining this friendly relationship with Israel. Among all the European states, I think it's currently probably the friendliest towards Israel. Um, the reason for that I think is very complicated. I mean, I think I don't really have time to get into that, but Hungary does practice a kind of philo-Semitism. Hungary got a bad reputation in the past for anti-Semitism, but now it's sort of philo-Semitism. It's very proud that it has the biggest synagogue in Europe, which is close to where I live, and maintaining its good relations with Israel is also quite a clever move in disarming American criticism. I mean, I don't think that's working. Let's put it this way. I mean, that may have been an original intent that, well, as long as we're with Israel, the Americans are going to look upon us with a kind of benign tolerance. That's not going to work. I think they're now in the Americans' crosshairs. It's going to be, and I think Hungary is in a tight spot. But there he is. He was the Israeli foreign minister, was in Hungary, and as I'll show you, what Siarto said in the joint news conference with the Israeli foreign minister. Anyway, it says here that Siarto says that Viktor Orban may personally discuss the matter with President Trump during his upcoming visit to the United States. This is not a subject for messaging. I have personally discussed it with Marco Rubio, and the Prime Minister has already spoken with President Trump. There will be another opportunity for direct talks in Washington next week. And then Siarto called on Brussels to end its anti-Israel policy. So now this is one more source of contention between Budapest and Brussels. The Budapest thinks that Brussels is too anti-Israel, and to remove related proposals from the European Union's agenda. Speaking at a joint press conference with Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar in Budapest, Minister Siarto said that such initiatives only serve to inflame tensions. He cited examples including the suspension of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, trade restrictions, and excluding Israel from the Horizon program. We urge Brussels to drop these proposals. And then this was kind of interesting that Orban gave an interview, a very, very brief interview with this Italian newspaper. No friend of Orban's, and it kind of deliberately distorted what he actually said to suggest that Orban was attacking Trump. I mean, clearly they have an interest now in fueling a fight between Orban and Trump. So the headline here is Orban slaps Europe, Trump's mistake about Putin, I'm going to get him to lift the sanctions. So that's the headline. But of course, Orban didn't say anything remotely like that. Because even when you follow the interview, and the interview is a kind of itself was a distortion of what he actually said, but even if you follow what the text as published by La Repubblica, Orban does not say that Trump has made a mistake about Putin and I'm going to get him to lift the sanctions. He said, President Orban, do you think Trump's sanctions on Russian oil are a mistake? And Orban says, I will soon be in Washington to discuss this with President Trump. We are discussing how to build a sustainable system for my country's economy because Hungary is heavily dependent on Russian oil and gas. Without them, energy prices will skyrocket, causing shortages in our supplies. And then the question is, so has Trump gone too far? From the Hungarian point of view, yes. And so we will try to find a way out, especially for Hungary. He says, I'm trying to find a way out. He doesn't say, oh, lift sanctions. Even there's nothing Hungary can. Hungary is not in any position to demand anything from the United States. So now Balázs Orbán, who is no relation to Viktor, but he does work for the prime minister, he immediately sent out this tweet saying that La Repubblica basically distorted what Orban said. Fake news strikes again. The goal is clear: to divide and weaken the leaders who stand for peace. The Italian left-wing daily La Repubblica, followed by the so-called independent Hungarian media, quote, independent, unquote, in the sense that they're all on the Western payroll, put words in Prime Minister Orban's mouth that he never said, even turning its own question into a fake quote. A textbook example of how liberal media distorts facts to pit the peace-oriented leaders against each other and attack those who stand for dialogue, sovereignty, and stability. And then before his meeting with Giorgia Meloni, so yeah, Orban was in Italy. He met phony Meloni, but he also had an audience with the Pope. And so anyway, before his meeting with Giorgia Meloni, the Italian journalist stopped Orban on the street and asked him about the new U.S. sanctions on Russian oil. Do you think the United States' new sanctions on Russian oil are a mistake by President Trump? Have you discussed this with him? The prime minister clearly responded that he will soon travel to Washington, where he will discuss, among other topics, the issue of sanctions with the American president. He emphasized, what interests me most is how we can build a functional system for the Hungarian economy, as Hungary heavily depends on Russian oil and gas. Without them, prices would skyrocket and serious supply shortages could emerge. And then La Repubblica, however, deliberately distorted the statement, falsely suggesting that Orban had called Trump's decision a mistake. As you can see, even the text, he didn't say that, oh, it was a mistake, and said he would try to have the sanctions withdrawn. None of this was ever said. The paper simply passed off its own interpretation as a direct quote. This is not journalism, it's political manipulation. The goal is not to inform, but to discredit Hungary, a nation that consistently stands for peace, stability, and national interest. Next week in Washington, Viktor Orban will represent Hungary's continued commitment to efforts aimed at bringing the war to an end as soon as possible. And then here's Peter Sziarto, who was today in Minsk at some Eurasian security conference. And there he met on the sidelines Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And here's Sziarto. After last week's talks in the US, I met Foreign Minister Lavrov today. Pleased to hear that Russia is also ready to maintain high-level dialogue with the US. This gives hope for peace. We also discussed Hungary's energy security, which will be addressed with the US next week in Washington. And then here's Sziarto again. I have discussed our energy supply with Secretary Rubio several times, and Prime Minister Viktor Orban has already talked about it with Donald Trump. Next week, they will have another opportunity to address this issue during their meeting in Washington. And then here is the BBC, which is a truly disgusting outlet. And of course, the BBC, as is its wont, completely embraces the kind of NATO EU propaganda line, which is that Hungary has to get itself off Russian oil. So here's the headline: Viktor Orban's dilemma, Russian oil or Trump's favor. And here it goes. The biggest issue souring U.S.-Hungary relations is oil. In 2024, Hungary even increased the amount of oil it receives through the Druzhba pipeline from Russia. On the 23rd of October, just as Orban was addressing a rally of his supporters in front of Parliament in Budapest, the U.S. announced sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft. Hungary receives 64% of its oil through the Druzhba pipeline from Russia via Belarus and Ukraine. In 2020, by 2024, the figure stood at 80%, or 5 million tons a year. And then the Hungarian government argues that land-based pipelines are the cheapest way to receive oil, and that with no seacoast of its own, it has no alternative. Much smaller quantities are also imported from Kazakhstan, Croatia, and so on. Another issue is that Russian Urals crude has a higher sulfur content than the Brent crude supplied from elsewhere. And that's very important because Hungary's oil refineries are geared towards Russian crude. I mean, they were built for the purpose of refining Russian crude. You can't just switch a refinery on to another type of crude. And now remember also, because these people are gangsters and terrorists and real thugs. There was an attack on the Hungarian refinery at Százhalombatta last week. A mysterious fire started at this refinery. And I say, since we now already have a track record of attacks on oil infrastructure, we had Ukraine attacking the Druzhba pipeline repeatedly. We had the attack on Nord Stream. Then we had the Polish court letting this Ukrainian suspect go. And then we had Sikorsky and Donald Tusk saying that they thoroughly support any attacks at all on any kind of infrastructure that helps Russia. So they absolutely justify an attack on the Hungarian oil refinery. Now, I don't know if this was attacked by NATO. That hasn't been proven yet, but it would certainly be consistent with everything else that's happened and consistent with all the justifications for these kinds of attacks. Anyway, within the EU, Orban is now the longest standing leader. Far from leaving the bloc, he wants to remake it in his own image as a union of sovereign states. And then for this, he has also won the praise from Putin. But Hungary's argument that it cannot change is undermined by the Czech example. Ooh, the Czech example. This is a country with a similar population to Hungary and also landlocked. The Czech Republic traditionally relied heavily on Russian crude for the 8 million tons of oil it needs a year. Starting in early 2022, following the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Czech government under Prime Minister Petr Fiala invested heavily in improving the existing Transalpine pipeline to the Italian port of Trieste. At the same time, its refineries at Kralupy and Litvinov were adapted for Brent crude. In April 2025, the Czech authorities announced proudly that they were no longer receiving a drop of Russian oil, not one drop. Energy experts say that while MOL, the Hungarian oil giant, is quietly changing its technology, what is missing is a political decision from the government to shift to the Adria pipeline from the Croatian port of Omišalj. Now, notice again that here's the BBC report, entirely in the business of advocacy. It's demanding that Hungary shift to this getting its oil through this Croatian port, and basically is refusing to accept Hungary's arguments that it's not in its economic interest to do so. When the pair meet next week, Trump will urge Orban to show some political will to wean itself. Again, the weaning, like the baby's weaning itself off Russian supplies. But Orban might see that as a hard decision to explain to Hungarian voters. After arguing for years that Hungary cannot survive without Russian oil and gas, he would lose face if it turns out it can. Oh, if it turns out it can. And then as the seagull flies, Osimar is only 44 miles from Trieste. Seaborne oil from Kazakhstan, Libya, Azerbaijan, the US, and Iraq could soon be flowing through the Adria pipeline to Hungary too. Notice the condescension. Oh, it could soon be flowing to Hungary too. Despite Orban's dire warnings of price hikes, there is no data, so far at least, to suggest that Czech consumers have to pay more. There is nothing his old friend Donald Trump likes more than striking a deal. Orban is about to find out how persuasive the US president can be. So, no evidence to suggest that Czech consumers have to pay more. Okay, let me look. Czech Journal. Here's the Czech Journal. Not that I ever read this, but I just did a casual search. Okay, well, what are energy prices in the Czech Republic? Here's the Czech Journal. Czech Republic braces for significant price increases in fuel, food, and energy. And it says the Czech Republic is on the cusp of a period of significant inflation with expected increases in the price of fuel, food, and energy. This surge is largely attributed to ongoing geopolitical tensions, particularly Russia's war in Ukraine, which has disrupted supply chains and driven up costs across the board. They're not suffering at all. It's just all a figment of Orban's imagination. One of the most immediate and impactful areas of increase is in energy prices. Households and businesses alike are already feeling the strain. The Czech National Bank has noted that energy payments form a large part of household expenditure, and the sharp rise in prices over the past year and a half has exacerbated this burden. Electricity prices have been particularly volatile, with the main domestic suppliers, raising their prices significantly. As of August 2024, the price per megawatt hour for households in the most common tariff has increased, representing a substantial rise from earlier prices. Similarly, natural gas prices have seen dramatic increases. And then suppliers like this have been forced to raise their prices due to the high costs on the wholesale market. For example, the price of gas fixed for 3 years increased by so. The cost of fuel is also on an upward trajectory. As of mid-July 2024, the average price is, whatever. These prices have been gradually climbing, influenced by global oil market trends and regional supply issues. The continuous rise in fuel prices is expected to impact not only individual consumers, but also the broader economy, particularly the transportation and logistics sector, which rely heavily on diesel and gasoline. So here we are. We have the BBC telling Orban, shut up. Look at the Czech Republic. Shut your mouth. You don't know what you're talking about. Look, the Czechs, they've completely switched, and there's no evidence of any increase in energy prices. And then we have Radek Sikorski saying, you've been told what you need to do. Stop arguing. So that's the thing. Now, the problem, of course, is I would imagine that that Trump, may have some sympathy for for Orban, but I wouldn't count on it. it's one of those things that, as I think, like, I don't, it's a bit of a cliche now, but I remember the famous saying of Henry Kissinger, that to be an enemy of the United States is certainly very dangerous, but to be a friend can be lethal. And so suddenly, Orban not only didn't get his peace summit, but he's now coming under pressure. Not on immigration, not on his attitudes to LGBT issues, not on corruption, not on his the politicization of the judiciary, but on oil. So anyway, let's take a look at our locals page. This is the our Gaggle community. This is on which we rely, because it's these are the people who very, very generously um, look after the dogs. They're always perturbed because the dogs are always basically dissatisfied, disgruntled. They never think that their hard work is rewarded. I mean, you know, it's not with me. I mean, I just do it for the love of it. But the dogs, they're not like that. They're much more materialistic, mercenary than I am. So I really appreciate the Gaggle community coming through for the dogs. Anyway, first question is Danake. Good to see you again, Danake. He says, Kedvesh George, dear George, now that it is clear for everyone Trump is basically Biden reloaded with even more nepotistic corruption, a bit less woke, and much more turbo Zio, isn't it extra disgusting to see Zion Don constantly fawning and sucking the kosher dick of despicable scumbag psychos like Randy Fine or pay Mistress Miriam Adelson et al. Gross. I agree with all of that. And certainly the news today um, that Netanyahu has launched a massive attack on Gaza is certainly not is very discouraging. Now, the ceasefire is certainly looking shaky, um, but it's still for the time being in place. But ultimately, I mean, I never agree with you in that the only way this ceasefire can survive is if Trump commits himself. Now, what does that mean? Commits himself if Trump is willing to get tough with Netanyahu, basically to cut Netanyahu off at the knees. That's the only way. Because if he doesn't, then absolutely Israel will sooner or later decide that this ceasefire is no longer in place. No, there's no point in us continuing with this, and we are relaunching our war in Gaza. And that will happen. That, without question, that will happen if Trump does not deal with Netanyahu right now. So essentially, what Netanyahu is now doing is testing the waters. He launches this attack on Gaza. Obviously, the Trump people who are kind of preoccupied. Trump is in Asia right now, so they're preoccupied with other things. But they're still insisting, oh no, the ceasefire's in place. See, and they ask Bibi, oh, is the ceasefire in place? Yeah. Ceasefire's in place. But it's only going to be in place if while Israel continues to receive the remains of the dead hostages, and it'll only be in place if Trump applies any pressure against Netanyahu. If the moment he doesn't do it. The moment he allows Netanyahu essentially to launch these attacks any moment that he feels like it, because the justification today for the attack was that that Hamas has somehow violated the ceasefire because it had attacked Israeli soldiers. Hamas denies this, but this is the same thing happened 2 weeks ago. So Hamas has basically denied that it launched any kind of an attack on Israeli soldiers, and I believe Hamas. I just don't believe what the Israelis are saying. And you have the claims that somehow Hamas is not returning the remains of the hostages. But the Trump people know perfectly well that it's very hard to get at the remains. They are buried under rubble. They don't have the excavation equipment to exhume these remains. And now Hamas is saying, well, we're not going to do any excavation if we're likely to come under attack from Israel. So that, if they stick with that view, then Israel said, well, that's it. Hamas has broken the ceasefire. We're not going to continue with this. That's it. And then the war restarts. The one thing that might stave that off is, I guess, Trump's ego, whether Trump is so vested in this his role as a peacemaker that he somehow had brought this war to an end, that he that he would not allow Netanyahu to break the ceasefire. I don't know. Because if the whole thing just collapses and Israel resumes this war, then that's it. Trump is in some trouble. I was listening today to Richard Barris, and Richard Barris, who is a Trump supporter, he says, well, the polls, he's a pollster. He says the polls are showing that Trump is losing popularity. He's losing popularity because the economy is not really doing that well. There's inflation. People are feeling inflation. They thought Trump would deal with the inflation problem. That's one thing. But they also think that Trump is spending a lot of time on foreign policy, which really wasn't Trump's thing. Trump is a domestic policy person. If you then spend a lot of time on your foreign policy, and then you failed, the war in Gaza resumes, and you're as far away as ever on Ukraine. So you've been spending all your time on foreign policy, and you don't have much to show for it. Then that's not going to be very good for Trump. And I think he is facing, I think, some peril, because people fundamentally, the public fundamentally isn't that interested in foreign policy. Now, even if he gets these great successes, it wouldn't. It's not going to help him. But contrary-wise, if you fail at foreign policy, and even though you've devoted your energies to it, if you fail, then you get punished. So foreign policy doesn't help you much, but it can hurt you. So that's the thing. I mean, George H.W. Bush was a kind of a foreign policy president. He had successes, foreign policy successes. He had the victory in Gulf War One. He had the Madrid Conference in 1991. He organized that. And then, of course, we had the collapse of the Soviet Union on his watch. So he can say, hey, we managed to um, destroy the Soviet Union, and we did it peacefully. There wasn't the all the wars that we expected to happen. He didn't get anything credit for any of that, and he lost decisively to Bill Clinton in 1992. So foreign policy doesn't help you very much, but it can hurt you. And if the Israel ceasefire does collapse, and I'd say now probably the odds favor its collapse, then that will hurt Trump. It'll hurt him how in the midterms, and he loses control of the House. Then he's going to be facing impeachment. The next 2 years will be all about Democrats attempting to impeach him. They're going to be impeaching him for many, many different things. And there's nothing much Miriam Adelson can do. Randy Fine, I agree, Danik, is a horrific psychopath and disgusting human being. And you didn't go far enough, despite your scabrous language. You didn't really go far enough. Trump is attacking Thomas Massey, who is a principled, consistent, non-interventionist, the kind of Trumpian non-interventionist, anti-color revolutions, anti-forever wars, against subsidizing other countries, including Israel. So Trump is always attacking Thomas Massey, and he's supporting primary challenges to Thomas Massey in Kentucky. And of course, Trump attacks Rand Paul for much the same reasons, while he does fundraisers for Lindsey Graham and supports this awful creature, Randy Fine. And Miriam Adelson, this a really disgusting person. I mean, I don't know. I'm not against gambling, but there's something disgusting about a person whose fortune is based on casinos. That's how she's worth 60 billion and more, and it's all on casinos. So, anyway, thank you so much, Danaki. Psinuk, thank you. Nice to see you again. Haven't seen you in a while. Thank you very much. Very, very generous of you, Psinuk. And he says, hello. Wow, even Trump's MRI is perfect. And the doctor said it was the best one they have seen for my age. Cannot make this up. And by the way, Netanyahu orders strikes on Gaza today. Peace plan really worked. Well, it's not looking good. Not looking good, I have to admit. However, in my defense, I always said that whether this plan works or doesn't work will depend on whether the United States applies pressure against Netanyahu. If it applies pressure on Netanyahu and forces him to implement this peace plan, then it'll work. If it doesn't, if it allows him to get away with this, so Netanyahu has now twice ordered strikes on Gaza, and Trump didn't do much about it. A couple more times that Netanyahu will do it and Trump doesn't do anything about it, then I think it's pretty much will be in the history books. So that'll be that. I mean, everything depends on really whether Trump is willing to apply any pressure against Netanyahu. Without it, then this peace plan is for the birds. Anyway, thank you so much for your generosity. Vic Shakapopoulos, good to see you again. Haven't seen you in a while. Dear George, while I agree with your skepticism and pessimism about the imminent fall of the Atlantic Empire and the birth of a multipolar world gospel, I believe in the recent years we surely expect to experience the American Western soft power diminish greatly. Would you agree with that? And if so, don't you think that it will eventually have consequences in the geopolitical power dynamics? Well, I think it would have consequences if it had happened. The problem is that I really don't see it. I mean, I remember a time not so long ago when for many crises in the world, they would not be they could not be solved without the active participation of the Soviet Union. The war between India and Pakistan, 1971, required the intervention of the Soviet Union. The war between India and Pakistan in 1965 required the intervention of the Soviet Union. The various wars in the Middle East, 67, 73, required the active participation of the Soviet Union to resolve them. The Madrid Conference that I've just talked about, that George H.W. Bush organized, was the co-chairman would be the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, when we look around the world today, I don't see Russia taking any part in anything. The Middle East, it's not even a player in the Middle East. I mean, we there are people get very excited. Oh well, this Giuliani in Syria, he's going to allow Russia to keep its the Tartus naval base. Well, he may or may not. We'll see how it goes. He's under a lot of pressure from Turkey. He's under pressure from Israel. He's under pressure from the United States. So he kind of wants to at least have a balance of forces. So he may decide, well, we'll let Russia keep these the Tartus base. That maybe, unless of course the Americans really press him and demand that he kick the Russians out. But so far the Russians haven't been kicked out. But that's about it. The Russians weren't even invited to Sharm el Sharif for that big conference. Peace in the Middle East, peace in our time, peace between Israel and the Palestinians. The Russians weren't even there. The Chinese weren't there. War, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Russia isn't even a player. Armenia and Azerbaijan come to Washington to negotiate. I'm not even sure what they're negotiating. The building of the Trump highway linking the two parts of Azerbaijan, the Nakhchivan to Azerbaijan proper. But it's which will be the Trump. The Trump corridor. It's the Zangezur corridor, but it'll be called the Trump corridor. That's Russia's backyard. And if we have time today, I also want to address the events in the Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where Russia is about to lose a key ally in Europe. Things are not going at all well in Bosnia and Herzegovina for our side, which I think is the side of the Serbs. They're being totally marginalized. They're being completely pushed out. And Russia seems unable to do anything about it. And then that could be Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then Serbia, and then the whole of Europe will be within this blanket of NATO. Because there'll be there'll be two islands left, at least on the European continent. There'll be Switzerland and Austria, and I wouldn't put any money on Austria and Switzerland staying out of NATO. So Russia was really one of the powers that were the guarantor powers of Dayton when that war in Bosnia and Herzegovina came to an end in 1995. So your question, and we were in this multipolar world. Well, where's the evidence for this? The only evidence cited is that India and China are somehow big economies, and they're big countries. They have big economies. But if there is going to be a trade war between China and the United States will win that trade war. And I don't think there will be a trade war because China knows that it cannot win this war. India knows it cannot win that war. So it's the the problem that I have is that where's the multipolarity? I'd like to see Russia exert greater influence in world affairs. But when Lavrov starts talking about multipolarity, he means India, China, Indonesia. Well, I don't really care too much about that. I mean, I just might, that the fact that India is now a very big economy. Okay, fine, wonderful. Am I supposed to get very excited about that? I mean, how much influence does India have in world affairs? What crises is India helping to resolve? I mean, is India helping Venezuela? I mean, Venezuela is coming under attack. It probably will come under very serious attack from the United States within the next few months. No one's going to be able to do anything to help Venezuela. Iran could certainly come under attack again. As we saw earlier in the summer, there's nothing Russia could do for Iran. It's supposed a great ally. So, I'm kind of puzzled. Where's my multipolarity? I'd love to see it. I just don't. I don't see too much. Now, your point. Would you agree that, and if so, don't you think that it would eventually have consequences within the geopolitical power dynamics? Yeah, absolutely. It would. If if it existed, then I think it would have it. But as I see it, Russia is very diminished, very very diminished. Given where it was, obviously in the great days of the Soviet Union, but even diminished where it was however bad the 90s were, Russia still counted in in world affairs. I think Russia counts for much less. So, anyway, thank you very much, Vic. Dennis Misty, nice to see you again. Thank you, Dennis Misty. And says, a little like the boy in the playground being bullied, I'm going to lose my temper and bring out my big stick soon. Yes, indeed. Poor old Russia, just act, Russia, just act. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the little boy in the playground, the 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 analogy that I prefer is King Lear. Remember King Lear, who basically, because of his own foolishness, he was kicked out of his palaces, um, and he was now living out, out in the cold and the rain, and having to endure the awfulness of the seasons. Thoroughly. He used to be a king. Now he's just living like a beggar, but he's still in his own mind. He's a king, and so he would just rage, and he would say, "I will do such things." What they are, I know not, but they will be the terrors of the earth. And he would do this repeatedly. What they are, I know not, but they will be the terrors of the earth. So it's it kind of reminds me more of the rage of King Lear. Anyway, thank you so much, NKMRD and Dennis Misty. So good, nice question. Marty, always so good to see you. And Marty presents for our delectation a picture of the very good-looking U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, always immaculately attired. And I think it's clear that Rubio is now the key player within the administration. He did it very cleverly. National Security Advisor, Secretary of State. No one has done that since Henry Kissinger. Briefly, he did it very briefly, just from the moment, I think, January 1973 through to August 1974, from the time that when Gerald Ford took over from Nixon. So it was 73, 74 when he had both positions. But Ford didn't really want him as National Security Advisor, so he was removed from that position. And so now Rubio has all of that, and Rubio is clearly the key player now. He's wholly in Israel's pocket. He is eagerly urging this war on Venezuela, and of course he helped sabotage any possible deal that could have been worked out in Budapest. He made sure that that wouldn't happen. And, he's the key player. And of course, he is feathering his nest, awaiting his run for the presidency in 2028. Without question, he's gonna run, and he's going to distance himself appropriately from Trump, because if Trump's attempts to end these wars fails, then Rubio will say, "Well, I did what I could, but it was Trump's policy, Trump's administration. I tried to help him. He didn't listen to me. Now we need to return to the good old days of the muscular neocon foreign policy." And so, little by little, Rubio, Lindsey Graham, and the neocons have crept back into key positions in the United States. Elliot Abrams is back. This isn't interesting. We always assume that Elliot Abrams now is very old. He's a figure from the 1980s. He worked in the Reagan administration, almost brought Reagan administration down with Iran-Contra, but he's back with Trump. He was in Trump's first term, and now he's back advising Trump in the second term. So they're all back. And then Marty gives us this picture of these dogs. This is look, these dogs. They may look cute, but they are absolute killers. So this picture by faces is really difficult to tell, because Buddy and Apple, they physically they look alike. I mean, in terms of size, they're very different, but their faces are very similar. So I'm not quite sure which one that is. They're both very mean to me. So they look alike to me. But anyway, thank you, Marty. And then we have Danaki, who says, "Too bad nowadays Azerbaijan can shoot down a helicopter with Russian so-called peacekeepers and not even apologize nor pay anything." No, I think that's very interesting. They shot down Russian helicopters. They didn't apologize. On the other hand, when Russia shot down accidentally, they did shoot down accidentally a Azerbaijani civilian airliners, then Azerbaijan kicked up a fuss, and shouted and screamed and was outraged and whatever, until Russia apologized. But remember we did a number of podcasts on the subject of this deteriorating relationship between Azerbaijan and Russia, entirely driven by Azerbaijan, that they were refusing to accept Russia's explanations for the downing of an Azerbaijani civilian aircraft, even though it was obvious and it was an accident. I mean, Russians didn't deliberately take down an Azerbaijani civilian aircraft, but nonetheless, Azerbaijan made a whole song and dance about it, and refusing to accept Russian explanations, refusing to accept Russian apologies. And even now, when they recently met, Aliyev, the Azerbaijani leader, treated Putin in this very haughty way. He wasn't even looking at him. He just looked into the distance while Putin was speaking. That's Azerbaijan with a population of 11 million. It's about 1/12 of the size of Russia. Anyway, and Steve K9 says, "My guess, Hungary will be supplied with oil somehow, which does not come from Russia, but it will be very expensive, and Hungarians will take another hit to their standard of living. Get ready to turn down the thermostat, George." I think that's probably true. I mean, it's possible that Trump will relent and provide Hungary with a carve-out. But of course, if he does, he does that, he has to then provide a carve out for Turkey, and for Slovakia. Maybe he'll do that, but I don't think Trump has any particular sentimental attachment to Hungary. I think, as far as he's concerned, I think Orban has probably outlived his usefulness for him. Now that Trump seems to have embraced entirely the sort of Biden, NATO, Starmer, Macron policy on Russia, I don't know if there's any use for Orban. I hope that's not true. But if that doesn't happen, then probably they have to find some way of getting oil from, via Croatia, and then of course there will be a huge spike in energy prices, and that means I'm going to get absolutely whacked over the head in January when it gets cold. Anyway, thank you, Steve. Cynthia, so good to see you, Cynthia. Cynthia, as everybody knows, is our resident film expert and scholar with an encyclopedic knowledge of cinema history, and she provides us regularly with very learned commentary and the usual, with encyclopedic references to the details of filmmaking and the particular films that we screen on Monday night at the movies. So, as I always say, we always screen something decent. This week we screened Unman, Wittering, and Zygo. Very, very interesting, rather creepy film made in 1971. So enjoy the film, part of the membership of the Gaggle. Enjoy the film, and of course enjoy it while reading Cynthia's very learned and astute observations, aesthetic judgments, and comments. So we're really very lucky to enjoy the benefits of Cynthia's encyclopedic range of cinematic references. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia. And now her comment is: do you think the reason the boys in last night's film got away with murder is that they all came from wealthy and powerful families? If so, does that mean that wealthy and powerful people got that way mostly by engaging in corrupt and criminal activities? And does this mean that they, along with their family members and close friends, will likely continue to get away with all sorts of crimes, including murder? I don't think so, because that was a kind of a minor public school. So it's what the English call public school, but of course it's a private school. It's a minor private school. It's not, the wealthy and powerful in England, they send their children to, these great, these fancy schools like Eton and Harrow and Winchester, and, but there are also very many minor private schools who have a quite undistinguished academic record. And I think the school had a very undistinguished academic record. The fact that the same teacher teaches history, Latin, chemistry, and math would indicate that the academic standards are pretty low. I mean, the same teacher cannot possibly teach all of these subjects at once. He said, "Oh, well, I can teach chemistry up to O level." What does that mean? Well, because I took chemistry up to O level. O level, I don't really have O levels anymore, but O level means it's a kind of a standardized test that you used to take at the age of 15 or 16. I took it. So in my day, you still had O levels and A levels. So it meant that this teacher was told, yeah, you can teach chemistry because you took chemistry when you were at school up to O level. In other words, you study chemistry up to the age of 15. Since you study chemistry up to the age of 15, then you're qualified to teach chemistry to boys. So it's obviously academically very undistinguished, and and even these boys who work out this scheme essentially to cheat, because they say, oh, about six of the boys are quite smart, and they're they're presumably going to do all the homework for everybody else in order to get, academic scholarships. Um, the reason I think that the boys thought that they could get away with the murder, and of course they did get away with it, is more that the teachers and the headmaster were very keen to hush everything up. So why do they want to hush everything up? Because otherwise, parents are not going to be sending their children to this school, and that means they're not going to be able to suck all these fees out of these stupid parents. So they have to lie to the parents and pretend that everything is fantastic, everything is going well, and that's why they cover everything up. Because if the parents were to find out that a teacher was murdered, that a boy committed suicide, then they will stop sending their children to the school. So I think it's more of a kind of an institutional cover up driven by greed, because that headmaster, he'd be out of a job if parents stopped paying these ridiculous exorbitant fees, thinking that they're getting some kind of an education. So I think that's the reason why the headmaster was so happy to have the whole thing covered up, and the boys figured this out. They knew that the headmaster will want to cover this up. He will not want to entertain any speculation that this was anything other than an accident. And presumably, this is a small town, small village. The police, they want to work with the school for the same reason. And thanks to the school, there's money. Money comes to the village, and so they're very keen to keep the school going. So the police made no real proper investigation, even though common sense would have suggested, why would somebody just fall down a cliff? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So I think the police, it is a corruption, but it's a corruption. It's a small-minded corruption, the corruption of people who want to keep a grift going, which is sucking money out of stupid parents, thinking that they're getting some kind of a great education in a shitty little private school. And the boys knew this. The boys knew that the headmaster will cover it up. The boys knew that the police would make no proper investigation. The cynical teachers, they don't really care as long as they keep their jobs. That art teacher, he doesn't care anything so long as he's got a job. He doesn't have to do much work. And I think that's more or less the attitude of the other teachers. They don't have to do much, and they can keep getting paid. I think and the boys figured this out. I think that what was interesting, I the one thing that I learned, I've done some teaching at school level, which I have to say I really hated. I absolutely hate teaching school children. The one thing that I learned is that school children, 14, 15, 16, 17, they are very, very crafty. They're much craftier than you are. And that's what you always know. They are, they may not be that smart. They may not know very much. They may not study very hard. They may not have learned that much. They don't read books or anything like that. But they're very crafty, and because they spend their time watching grown-ups, and they learn how they can manipulate grown-ups to their advantage. That's a skill, and but we don't really think about it, because once you stop being 14 or 15, you don't really think in along those lines. But 14 or 15-year-olds, they are extremely crafty, and they figured out these boys. They figured this out, that they can threaten a teacher, they can scare a teacher by threatening to kill him, and they know that how does the teacher respond? Always going, oh, I'm going to go to the headmaster. Look, they're threatening me. I'll go to the headmaster. But they figured it out. They said, yeah, but the headmaster isn't going to listen to this. The headmaster does not want bad publicity for his school, and he's going to blame this teacher for any bad publicity. So the headmaster will be very unsympathetic to the teacher. So the boys kind of figured this out. And that's why the boys figured out they can get away with murder. There'll be no police investigation. The headmaster will want to cover it up. So it's a sleazy, corrupt, low-level sordidness that I think underlies it, rather than because there's a wealthy and powerful families. At least that was my interpretation. I thought this was a minor public school. This was not a one of the kind of schools that you the rich and powerful send their boys to. Anyway, that's my view. You can, I'd be interested what other people's interpretation is, or Cynthia, what your interpretation, or anybody else. I'd be interested if you disagree with me. I'd love to hear the basis of your disagreements. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then Steve K9 says Dmitriev, educated at Harvard, is the oligarch's man. Yep, absolutely. He's the oligarch's man. He is scum. So he came to the United States ostensibly to meet with Witkoff. And somehow he and Witkoff, they're on the same level. They talk about money. How do we make more money? And he's the one who came up with that scheme of somehow building the tunnel linking the Russian Federation and Alaska, and then, hey, why don't we get Elon Musk to put up the money for this? So this is the way he thinks. And then, of course, for his troubles, he was described as nothing more than a Russian propagandist by Scott Bessent on one of those Sunday talk shows. So that after all his efforts to cultivate rich people in the United States and saying, "Hey, we rich people in Russia, you rich people in the United States, we're the same kind of people. We talk the same language. We just want to make money. We want business relations. We want good, all of us to be happy and making money." After all that talk, he gets called a Russian propagandist by Scott Bessent, who, of course, is George Soros man. He made his name working for George Soros. That's who he was. He holds all of that Russophobia, the anti-Russian animus that George Soros has always had. That's Dmitriev. Anne-Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for your generosity. Anne-Marie, as you know, is resident musical expert, very distinguished musician, who works in the most distinguished orchestra. He's worked in some of the finest orchestras in the world, has worked with some outstanding composers and conductors of the 20th and 21st centuries, knows an amazing amount about music, about all the differences between different performances of the same piece of music. And, we're very lucky to have her contributions on our pages. And I'm always learning so much about music and the performance of music from Anne-Marie's comments. And recently she made some amazing comments on Vaughan Williams' Fantasy on the theme of Thomas Tallis. It kind of forced me to think and to respond to her comments. And I just always just such a pleasure and such a privilege for us to enjoy, such learned, distinguished musical commentary, which you don't get on any other um, platform. So we are really very, very happy to have that. So thank you so much, as always, Anne Marie. Really appreciate that. And then Steve K9 says, apropos of the, where is it? Yeah. What was it? Apropos of Cynthia's comment, it says we could probably find this somewhere, but I think the percentage of sociopaths and psychopaths among political leaders, in fact, most leaders, will be remarkably high. There's nothing new about this, and not much to be done. It's simply part of human nature. Being a psychopath is a very useful trait if you want to become a leader. I wonder what, not so much psychopath. I mean, a sociopath. I think I put it more in that way. I think you do have to be able to essentially cut yourself off from any humane feelings. I mean, you always have to cut off, I mean, you basically you're responsible for killing any number of people. Now, like if you're an ordinary person, and you're responsible for inflicting pain on anyone, but on a friend, even not even necessarily a friend, somebody you've inflicted pain on, an acquaintance, you've inflicted pain on an animal, you're troubled by it. You have a conscience. You feel bad about yourself. You feel you feel guilt about having inflicted pain. Well, that's very commendable. It's morally decent. I mean, that's what makes us distinctively human. But it means you can't be a leader, because you have to be able to cut yourself off from any such feelings if you're going to be a leader. You have to go to bed at night and not think about all the pain that you have caused, all the people's deaths that you have caused. And I think that's what I think that's a kind of the sociopath that distinguishes political leaders. Most people are not good at it. They can't do it, because I think they're troubled by conscience. Remember again Shakespeare's line, "Conscience doth make cowards of us all." Yeah, if you have a conscience, you become a coward, and therefore you can't be a leader. You don't have what it takes to make decisions that often involve great cruelty. So it's an unfortunate fact. Somebody I think wrote, I think person who I think wrote one of, or I don't know, ghost wrote, I think one of Trump's books. I don't know if it was The Art of the Deal or one of his books, and he said, "Well, how would you characterize Trump?" And he says one thing about Trump, he really isn't a very reflective person. He doesn't think about the past. He doesn't think about the anything that he may have done, any hurt that he may have caused. He doesn't spend any time thinking about that. He's just the way he is, like always thinking about the future. How can get a better deal on this or that? But he does not spend time thinking about, well, did I treat my wife badly? That just simply he will not lose any sleep at all about whether he treated his wife badly or any of his wives, or any of his children or anything like that. He's just not wired that way. And then Dennis Misty says, "Have sympathy for us in England, with the BBC and an entire anti-Russian media banging their war drums." Oh God, yes, heavens, warplanes are overheard here in Yorkshire morning at tonight. Yeah, is kind of interesting. The British belligerence is in indirect proportion to their likelihood of actually being involved in a war. They're very far from the action. They're nowhere near Ukraine. They're nowhere near Russia. They feel that they can afford to bang the drum for war because they can stay away. I mean, this is how the British have always been. They're very good at it, very good at getting other people, other countries to fight their wars for them. And that's what they think will happen if there's a war with Russia. So the British are the loudest in demanding. So when are we going to have this war? Finally, get this war with Russia off the ground. When's that going to happen? As that, and so 2030. Let's make it a little early. Can't we make it 2028? We're itching for this war. But they figure that they're not going to be doing any of the fighting. It'll probably be the people in the front line, Poles, the Baltics, maybe the Germans, and then, of course, the Americans are going to come in. But the British will be able to stay on their British Isles, far from the action. I think that's, if you think that you can get away with avoiding the fight, then you can you can bang the drum for war. It's not going to affect you. It's the sort of the Lindsey Graham mentality, always calling for war, always avoiding war yourself. So yeah, so I do have sympathy for you, Dennis. Yeah, very much so. I lived in Britain for many years, and yeah, I know what it's like. And anyway, then Richard Phillips says, I agree. He says casino owners are always slime bags. Yeah, they really are. They really are. And I think that if you say, well, how do you make your money? Well, I make my money. I own casinos. Well, I mean, so you're basically making your money robbing ordinary people because it's always the house always wins, and you do it. You get ordinary people basically pissing away the social security checks. I mean, it's kind of really sleazy. Now it's legal, and I don't want it to be made illegal. So I don't take a particularly censorious view of this because it is legal. People like to gamble. People get a thrill out of it, but it's a very sleazy way of making money. I mean, it's just like pornography. It's okay. Well, pornography it's legal, and I don't want it to be made illegal. But you say, well, how do you make your money? Well, I own all kinds of pornography manufacturing sites or whatever. That's kind of dismal. I mean, you're not helping people. You're making life worse for so many people. So it's like same with casinos. You're not helping anyone. You're making life worse for people. So there's the absolute scumbags. And Richard Phillips says, I think I slithered back is more. I think slithered back is more apt. I think as about the slim bags or slime bags. And yeah. And then Steve K. says, I don't think there's much difference between psychopaths and sociopaths. You're right about the characteristic. Look, lack of empathy, highly intelligent, ruthless. And again, you're right. Being able to send thousands of millions to their death is the ultimate of sociopathy. Yeah, exactly right. And then Britain, Churchill, enough said. Yeah, exactly. And again, Churchill was a classic, always wanting war, belligerent and so on. A man of staggering military incompetence. I mean, everything he was ever involved in always ended in fiasco. I remember Cholmondeley, the late John Cholmondeley, in his book said, he was, Duke of Marlborough was his ancestor, and he wrote a kind of a huge biography of the Duke of Marlborough, but Cholmondeley says he was no Duke of Marlborough. He may have known a lot about the Duke of Marlborough, but he was no Duke of Marlborough. I mean, Duke of Marlborough was a brilliant general. Churchill was anything but a brilliant general. Anyway, my time is up. It's always so much fun, and it always goes by. Time goes by very quickly. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody who joined me. Thank you above all to everyone who contributed something to the tip jar. As I say, in a few hours, the dogs are going to be waking up. First thing they always do, check the tip jar. Next thing they do is, say, how can we harangue George? Because this is unacceptable. That's always their response. This is unacceptable. But that's them. They're animals. They're not on a high educational, sophisticated level that we are on. So, anyway, that's my burden in life. Thank you, everybody who joined me. And we'll be back Thursday, same time. And until then, all the best.